Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're peeling back centuries of pop culture myths, movies, and pseudoscience to reveal the true origins of the world's most famous lost city. We're going to look at exactly where the story of Atlantis came from, how it evolved over time, and what it was actually meant to teach us.
So, let's dive right in. We're going to explore why the biggest mystery surrounding Atlantis isn't actually where it is, but why it was created in the very first place. For centuries, explorers, scientists, and theorists have poured immense resources into locating this sunken utopia. But what if, all this time, they've been searching for a physical answer to what was really just a philosophical question?
Section 1. The Search for a Myth.
We're starting our journey by looking at the modern obsession with finding a physical location for the sunken city. The human drive to find this lost empire is so incredibly strong that we've essentially scoured the globe, trying to match ancient texts to actual geological formations. People have desperately tried to map Plato's descriptions onto real places. Some point to Doggerland, which is a very real ancient landmass that sank beneath the North Sea at the end of the last ice age. Others point to Minoan Crete, which was wiped out by a massive volcanic eruption. And lately, theorists have been eyeing the Rishid structure, that massive Eye of the Sahara in Mauritania, or even the Algerian plateau in the Maghreb. It seems like every time we find a sunken ruin or some circular geographic feature, someone out there immediately shouts, Atlantis.
But here's the hard pivot, and it's a big one. Despite all the satellite imagery and deep-sea dives, classicists and historians universally agree that this mighty, sunken empire was never a real place. The consensus among experts who actually study ancient Greek literature is absolute. There is no missing continent. There is no sunken Bronze Age metropolis. So where on earth did the idea come from?
Section 2. A Tale of Two Cities.
Well, if it wasn't a real place, we've got to look at the texts where it first showed up. Plato's dialogues, the Timaeus and Critias, written right around 360 BC. And here's a wild fact for you. Before Plato, there is absolutely zero mention of Atlantis in any historical record anywhere in the world. The absolute crucial takeaway here is that Plato was not filing a historical report. He was a philosopher, and he was inventing a powerful rhetorical device. Atlantis was essentially a custom-built punching bag, designed specifically to make his own ideal vision of Athens look incredible. As scholars like Christopher Gill point out, the story frames human political life against the massive scope of the cosmos, pitting two ancient powers against each other just to prove a philosophical point about justice and statecraft.
And that brilliantly illustrates Plato's actual goal, creating a stark contrast that pits his perfect, ideal state of ancient Athens against the bloated, arrogant foil of Atlantis. In Plato's narrative, ancient Athens, which perfectly represented his vision of the ideal society from his earlier work, The Republic, actually defeats the technologically advanced, massively wealthy, but completely morally corrupt Atlantean Empire. See, Atlantis wasn't the hero of Plato's story. They were the villains. They were the anti-Athens.
Section 3. Plato's Philosophical Parable. To truly grasp Plato's original purpose, we have to look at the moral lesson he was desperately trying to teach his students about political power. He wanted to show a state in motion, a society facing the ultimate test of its character. Atlantis was designed as a very specific thought experiment to showcase the absolute dangers of hubris and the inevitable, crushing ruin of greedy, expansionist powers. Plato described Atlantis as an empire that got so wealthy and so proud that it literally lost the favor of the gods. That catastrophic earthquake that sinks Atlantis in a single day and night, that wasn't just some random geological event. In the context of his story, it was direct divine punishment for moral decay.
Section 4. The Egyptian Oral Tradition. So how did a simple philosophical thought experiment convince so many people that it was a true historical account? Why did people start taking it literally? Well, honestly, it's because Plato was a masterful storyteller. He meticulously crafted this whole multi-generational oral tradition to give his parable the illusion of serious ancient authority. It's basically a very old game of telephone. In the dialogue, a character named Critias claims he heard the story from his grandfather, who heard it from a relative, who originally got it from Solon, the legendary Greek statesman, who supposedly translated it from ancient Egyptian records during a trip to Sais. By tracing the story all the way back to Egypt, a culture the Greeks viewed as immensely ancient and wise, Plato gave his fictional empire a really powerful veneer of truth.
However, as scholar Oliver D. Smith points out, there is a distinct lack of historical evidence that Solon actually ever traveled to Egypt and heard this tale.
Furthermore, there's absolutely nothing in ancient Egyptian mythology or their massive trove of written records that references Atlantis. Even Herodotus, who visited the exact same Egyptian city of size that Solon supposedly visited, never recorded a single word about Atlantis. Not one word.
In fact, it turns out Plato intentionally tampered with his own family's genealogy to engineer a story that felt real to his contemporaries, totally blurring the line between fact and fiction. He skipped entire generations in the lineage of Critias, knowing full well that a story passed down by word of mouth over a century and a half by a 90-year-old man to a child would be inherently unreliable. Some scholars even suggest this was just a massive inside joke for his students, a subtle, clever hint that the story was a rhetorical invention, not literal history.
Section 5. How the parable became real.
So, if Plato's contemporaries knew he was making the whole thing up, how did the modern craze of searching for Atlantis even begin? I mean, Aristotle, Plato's own student, recognized that Atlantis was destroyed by the very author who invented it. For centuries, Atlantis was viewed purely as an academic allegory. That is, until 19th century literature and pseudoscience explosively revived it. The real turning point for us in the modern era began with Jules Verne's 1870 novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where Captain Nemo actually takes a scuba tour of the Atlantean ruins. But the guy who truly cemented Atlantis as a supposed historical reality was an American named Ignatius Donnelly.
Ignatius Donnelly completely stripped away Plato's philosophical message. In 1882, he published a wildly popular book that falsely argued Atlantis was the literal origin of all human civilization. It was essentially a 19th century conspiracy theory that just became a runaway bestseller. Donnelly claimed that literally everything, from Egyptian pyramids to Mayan agriculture, was inherited from Atlantean survivors. He used this wild blend of misapplied science and totally out-of-context archaeology to claim that Atlantis was a real island that suffered a real, catastrophic doom. And this single book permanently infected the popular imagination, transforming a Greek political fable into the pseudoscientific obsession that we are still dealing with today.
As archaeologist Kenneth Feder so perfectly summarizes it, we have literally spent a century looking in the oceans for something that only ever existed in the brilliant mind of a Greek philosopher. We've taken Plato's ultimate warning about the dangers of imperial greed, and we turned the whole thing into a treasure hunt. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder. What is it about human nature that makes us crave the physical mystery of a lost utopia so much more than the vital political lesson it was meant to teach? Even when we are presented with the hard, undeniable facts of how and why Plato constructed this myth, we still desperately want Atlantis to be real. Maybe the true magic of Atlantis isn't that it was a real sunken city, but that it's a story told with such incredible power that it managed to conquer our collective imagination for over 2,000 years. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and always keep questioning the stories you've been told.